r/AskReddt. Serious redditors who are now married because you didn't know how to break up with your so. How is that going for you? I'll add my story to the mix. He and I had a very tumultuous relationship for the first few years together due to emotional immaturity and trauma on both our parts. He was my rebound after my first true heartbreak, and we started dating way too soon. We fought often, broke up once or twice, and I constantly thought about leaving, even after we'd moved in together. Still, I'd grown dependent on him in ways I now see were unhealthy, and while I did have feelings for him, part of me was just scared of being alone. When he shocked me by popping the question, my stomach dropped, and I physically wanted to run. Every fiber in my body was yelling no, 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 in that moment, but his proposal speech was so beautiful and heartfelt, and he was so vulnerable and open, that I muttered a bewildered yes before I could even process my feelings. Having to call our parents immediately to share the news was just torture. Honestly, looking back on that moment, I have no idea why I wasn't just honest with him, but there was a part of me that did love and care for him, and I don't know exactly, but I wanted to see if we could work ourselves out together, even though it all felt so hopeless and wrong. We've been together 8 years now, married 4, and I'm so happy to say that we are the perfect partners for each other. We've both grown so much on our own, through sheer will and hard work, and in that process we've also grown together in ways I couldn't have imagined. He is the most insightful, self-aware man I've ever met, and he loves me more than I ever felt I deserved. And through him, I learned how to love, genuinely, and, to the best of my abilities, selflessly. He is truly my other half in life, and without him, I would be so lost. I'm so grateful that part of me that was scared and hopeless and wanted to run away screaming decided to stay, to wait and see if we could grow together, to see what life we could build together. The journey has been more painful and more difficult than anything I've ever faced, but it's also been the most precious and humbling and life-affirming experience in every way. As a wise man once said, the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. All of the top comments are people pointing out the positive outcomes of their situation. I feel that it would be wrong for me to not share my story, which turned out differently. I knew from a couple of months into the relationship that I didn't love her. She came from a terrible home situation, and she was severely depressed with borderline personality disorder to boot. I felt so sorry for her. I honestly worried that if I left her, she would commit suicide. She had 2 little girls who needed someone stable and normal in their lives. I was afraid that I would be letting them down if I left. Who else was going to help them if I didn't? Before we got married she cheated on me, but she was in such denial about it that she managed to convince me that it didn't happen. Although looking back on it, I know it's true. We fought almost daily. We screamed at each other, and she would get so angry that she would take things that were important to us, shared symbols of our love and affection, like her wedding rings, our marriage certificate, gifts that I bought for her, and attempt to destroy them or throw them away. I wasn't at all interested in having sex with her, and most of the time I wasn't able to force myself. She could sense that there was something wrong in our relationship, and she constantly made comments to me about how I didn't love her and didn't want to be with her. Towards the end our fighting got so bad that it was sometimes physical. Never punching or hitting, but shoving and grabbing one another. I felt like I was losing control of myself. I ended up in therapy and had a relapse. I'm a recovering addict and had been clean for 3 years when she and I got together. After we had been married for a while she started bringing men around, friends from work. She swore that nothing was happening with them, and by this point I was so detached from reality that I honestly didn't much care one way or the other. I finally had a breakthrough in therapy where I realized that a reaction to how I live my life is not my problem. We split up, and I spent the next 6 months spiraling deeper into my addiction before I started to come out of it. I have since remarried to someone I do love with all my heart, but I still have nightmares. This is not hyperbole, actual real life nightmares. My current wife will tell me some mornings about how I was screaming in my sleep that I'm still stuck in that horrible abusive loveless relationship. there simply isn't enough time for me to adequately express all of the different ramifications of that relationship. There was only one positive thing that came out of it, and that was that I learned that you cannot settle for a relationship. The person with whom you intend to spend your life has to be someone who meets all of your criteria, or you will never be happy with them. The negative consequences, on the other hand, are apparent in my everyday life even now, in my relationships with other people, especially my current wife, my finances, and my own general psychological well-being. Please, don't stay with someone unless you're sure. I was dating an Australian dude for a couple of years. I'm American, and we exhausted all the visitor visas we could, visiting one another. Eventually, it came down to if we wanted to be together, we had to get married. We had dated a long time and loved each other, but neither of us really had marriage as a priority. So we sat down, wrote a pros and cons list, and decided getting married was the best thing for us. However, over the time we spent dating, he stopped doing a few things, like showering. When he moved back to the States as my fiance, I noticed just the smell of him was overpowering. I caught him at one point, saying he had just showered and didn't need one, but he actually hadn't showered in 2 weeks. He'd go down and swim in the apartment pool and count that as a shower. In the summertime, I'm pretty sure he showered even less. I can't emphasize enough how bad it was. I literally had to throw away my couch because the stink seeped into it and I couldn't get it out. I discovered earlier in our relationship that he didn't know how to blow his nose. Tried to show him, but he said he couldn't do it and would just pick his nose and wipe it on the desk. Got him to at least wipe it on a tissue, but he stopped doing that and wiped it on a wall near his desk where I couldn't see and would have the pleasure of discovering later. He also couldn't work in the States at this point, so he said he'd keep up the apartment while I worked. Yeah, he didn't. He wouldn't clean anything he thought I'd touched. The apartment was in squalor and filled with gnats and flies and a mountain of shipping boxes from his habit of ordering online. I eventually just bought paper plates and stuff and only used those, so he couldn't say I used any dishes and I could keep on him to clean up his own mess. Suffice to say, by the time the date to be married came around, I didn't want to, but he sold everything he owned in Australia. He owned his own apartment there, had his own car. He quit his job. I couldn't just send him back and not feel like a monster for not trying. So I tried. We got married. It was predictably awful. I spent a lot of nights staying at work until midnight, just drawing alone on my tablet, so I could have some peace away from him. He was supposed to get a job when he got his green card in after we got married, and he told me there was a 2-year queue for it to come in. At the time this wasn't unheard of, just a bit longer than usual, reasonable for a strange system. Yeah, he lied so he wouldn't have to get a job. Couldn't work without a green card. He got it in 6 months or so. I found out. Huge fight ensued. Gave him one last chance to make it right, go get a job, and get his shit together. He got an unpaid online internship. I continued my late nights at work until one evening I was driving home and just started screaming. Out of the blue. Just screaming and yelling at myself for what was becoming of my life. I hated my job. I hated my home life. I hated the state I lived in. I was extremely depressed and something had to change. Pulled over on the side of the road and just screamed at myself for letting it get this bad. So I went home. We had a fight. I laid out everything and told him I wanted a divorce. It was actually a pretty peaceful divorce. I think he knew by then that it wasn't working too. But while we were in the middle of it, he knew I loved travel, but wasn't well off. So he told me that I'd never get back to Australia without his help. It just so happened that I had recently looked at a map of the world and figured out where the exact opposite part of the world was from where I was, in just an idle wish to be as far away as possible. It was the ocean between Madagascar and Western Australia. With what he said and that fact, that was enough for me. So quit my job, sold my stuff, got a year-long working holiday visa, and moved near Perth. So I suppose it worked out okay for me once it was all over. I don't think I would have had the motivation to do that if I wasn't fueled by pure spite and desperation to never be where I was again. I ended up working and traveling until my money ran out, through Oz, Hawaii, lived there a year, across the western US, and BC, Canada. Then I moved to the place I liked most in my travels, that didn't require a visa. So now I live near Seattle. I'm poor and single, renting a room with a couple of my closest friends, and extremely happy. Close bracket. TLDR, married a stinky man, because he left everything in his home country to be with me. Gave it a try. He made the apartment into a stink hell, and lied about his green card, so he wouldn't have to work. Got divorced, moved across the world temporarily, because he told me I couldn't. Much happier. It's been 10 years for me. I wanted to break up multiple times during those years, and we actually did a few times, but we always managed to come back to each other. Here are my thoughts on the subject. From my side, I always knew she was a terrific partner, but selfishly I wanted to live it up a bit, sleep with other people, chase other people, etc. I always thought that, if I left her, I would rip her heart out, which prevented me from ever truly breaking things off. My love, when I was younger, was mostly built on things I wanted out of life, and I did not consider enough how my actions and thoughts would impact my circle of family/friends. Now here we are, 10 years into it, and I have to admit that, while I've grown up substantially during those years, the way I love has grown and evolved as well. The things I love have changed. I'm so grateful that my partner and I were able to stick together during those tough times. Now when I look at her, I see a strong, independent, caring, and wholesome woman that provides most of the things I need in life. It's funny because all this time I always thought she would be broken if we broke up, but now I see that I'm the one that needs her more than she needs me. She's an amazing human being with so many positive traits. Any man would be lucky as hell to have her. With the things I've put this woman through, it's a miracle that she still wants to be with me, but her love has grown and evolved as well. There's a beauty in our relationship, in how we've seen our personal and combined development over the years. I look at her, and I see a woman that's built up her strength, intelligence, and love over the years. From the get-go, she knew she wanted to be with me for life, and while it did take a little longer for me to realize this as well, I'm happy that I see this. My recommendation for people that are suffering through the inability to decide on their relationships is to look at the intangibles in your partner. Are they generous, loving, caring? Do they see the beauty in other people? Are they forgiving? Do they make you feel special and beautiful? Sometimes we focus on one or two negatives in a relationship. The truth is that you'll never find someone on this planet that is 100% perfect for you all the time. There will be bumps. But if your partner is someone that demonstrates the above stated values and more, then perhaps you should reconsider your position. Ultimately, you need to do what you think is best for you. Just remember that you will grow wiser over the years, and it may take a little longer for you to truly see what you had in your relationship. For every person unable to break off a relationship, there are dozens of others that did actually break off their relationship. And out of those dozens, there are a few that regret it down the road. I'm not saying you'll regret your decision, just that you will see the world differently multiple times over your lifetime, and the not so perfect partner you have now could end up being your perfect partner down the road. There are not enough wholesome and good people on this planet, and if you happen to be with one right now, then it may be worth your effort to work things out. That said, if you are completely disengaged from your relationship and causing your partner too much heartache, then perhaps you do need to break up. I'm simply providing my viewpoint and personal experience. To each their own. This will probably get buried, but oh well. We moved in together after 6 months of dating simply because he was the first guy I had dated who actually had his shit together, and I was so desperate to leave my parents' house. He made everything about me, the sex, our dates, our vacations, etc. I had never been in a relationship where I was considered a priority. He was absolutely perfect, quirky, but perfect in my eyes. He was older by 3 years and had the work ethic of a horse. He was going to work and provide for others until the day he died. No doubt about it. After a year of living together, things were great. We communicated well. The sex was fantastic. We lived for one another. It was perfect. He proposed. I said yes. 6 months into our engagement, my parents arranged an intervention sort of meeting and told me it was about the failing relationship between my brother and I. He was in an emotionally abusive relationship and she had led him to drink, which led him to become an alcoholic, and my parents refused to believe me. So at this intervention my family proceeds to tell me how they don't want this wonderful man in my life to join our family. They think I'm making a mistake because nobody is that genuine and he just comes across as fake, and we don't like how open he is. This came after they promised our budget for our wedding and gave us an ultimatum to either have the budget for a wedding or a down payment on a house. So I cried, I pondered, I cried some more, and I started to doubt all of the motives behind his actions. I came up with these weird alternative motives and started doubting all of his intentions. But then he asked me 2 months later if I would marry him on New Year's Eve, in 2 weeks. No dress, no friends, just closest family. I told him I didn't want my family there and only his. And he says, the only way I'm going to marry you is in the presence of your family. You respect your parents too much to not have them there. And so I told my mom what our plans were, and she immediately asked me, are you pregnant? Why the rush? I don't understand why you're in such a hurry to throw your life away. And I wanted to run. I wanted to not marry him and not talk to my parents and just disappear. I felt so alone until I got home that night and he held me. I didn't even have to tell him what happened because he just knew the conversation didn't go well with my mom. And that's when I realized that you don't pick your parents, but you get to pick your so, and that's who you need to be happy with, because that's who you spend the rest of your life with. And I realized that he respected my wishes more than my parents respected them. So I told my parents where we would be getting married, and if they wanted to be there we would be getting married at 3 o'clock. So we get to my future in-laws house and they have gutted their home of all furniture and turned their dining room into an altar for us. They have stripped their house of all Christmas decorations and tied bows in our wedding colors that would have been had we kept our original plan. They set up chairs and linens and tables and centerpieces of my favorite flowers in their living room that have converted to a reception area. They made dinner for 40 people, combined my family and his. He grew up Mormon with 8 siblings. Then, my family starts to show up. My parents were first to arrive. They walk in and see what my in-laws have done, and my mom starts to cry. The first time in 10 years that she shed a tear, and she realized just what kind of environment I was marrying into. One that was loving and accepting and supportive. She was angry with herself for wanting to convince me otherwise, and so I said I do in spite of them. Now, a year and a half later, my husband and I have completed our 5-year plan. We completed it in 10 months. This involved buying a house, paying off 2 cars, and consolidating all of our credit card debt so that we could prepare for children. I have learned how to cook and experiment with recipes. I have this incredible support system in the form of my in-laws and husband. He has pushed me to find my career, and it is taking off like crazy. And I'm so thankful I decided to spite my parents and not run. I have never been happier. I'm so proud I didn't let the opinion of my parents alter my view like so many people do. I started down that path and I went against my doubts and trusted my gut, and I'm in a much better place for it. TLDR. Parents tried to convince me not to marry my husband and I went against their wishes and did it anyway, and am all the merrier for it. Well, I made the throwaway, so here goes. It's fucking horrible. She is the single most useless, incompetent human I've ever met. She doesn't work, but she's so emotionally needy that I'm often an hour late to work because she's begging me not to go. She can't be bothered to clean up after herself, let alone take care of the beautiful house we bought with my money, but she complains when I try to clean because I'm not spending time with her. I do literally everything to keep our lives running while she sits on the couch watching TV all day, and yet somehow in the rare fleeting moments that I get enough spine to talk back to her, she immediately finds a way to make me the bad guy. She refuses to take responsibility for anything and always tries to make everything my fault. Her perennial excuse is that she's depressed and has had, but she stopped going to therapy. I love paying for all the missed appointments she didn't tell me about and won't go back. She complains endlessly about everything in her life all the time. when she has a cold, which is apparently always. You'd think Satan himself was jamming his spent dick up her nose all day. We have a kid. After being married for about a year we decided to open up our marriage, by which I mean we had one conversation about it. Then she made an online dating profile and started chatting with guys, and then I found out she had drunkenly kissed someone, so I figured I might as well just go along with it. 6 months later she was pregnant. I was pretty sure it wasn't mine, but she fudged the timeline and cried whenever I tried to talk to her about it until one day there we were with a kid. After about a year and a half I realized I loved the kid, and based on one or two things I was pretty sure he was actually mine. So I did a DNA test without telling her. Not mine after all. I spent that day crying in the bathroom at work, and I'm pretty sure it's created a permanent rift in my relationship with my kid. Every day is the worst day of my life. Every night when I go to bed I pray I won't wake up. I'm not going to kill myself, mostly because I'm a coward, but also because the one time I almost did I got yelled at for half an hour about how selfish I am, and I don't want to risk that shit show again. Also, I'm trying to be a good dad despite everything, and I might be able to be a buffer to protect my kid from her. I sleepwalk through every day in a haze of unreality. Mostly I just daydream about what would happen if she and the kid died in a car crash or something. My life would be so good. Hell, I'd be fine with just her going. I'm basically a single dad already, with an invalid spewing back at me from the couch. It would be easier without her. Good people get taken for no reason every day. As for me, maybe I'll get lucky and die young. Not exactly my situation, but it's similar. I just had to get this out and tell someone. We've been married for nearly 10 years. High school sweethearts, married at 19, because the military has a way of coercing those kind of major life decisions on young kids. Speaking of kids, we have none. We always have just told each other sometime soonish. She focused on her education instead, while I was in the military and spending most of my time deployed. She obtained 3 degrees, worked hard to obtain a professional license in her field. I finished up my military service, and I'm a 3rd year college student now. Back to the kids thing, many of our couple friends are pregnant, and this of course opened the door for a serious conversation. My wife picked a date this fall to go on vacation jet away and start trying for a baby. Here's the hang up. I'm mostly certainly transgender. I've always felt off. I never felt quite comfortable in my own skin. I've wrestled with feelings that I was broken or assembled improperly. I struggled to feel manly or masculine, which was one of the motivating factors to join the military after high school. I was hoping it would solidify my machismo and I could push away those feelings once and for all. It kinda worked for a time. But coming home from deployments and spending time at home, the feelings of not liking being a man crept back in. I explored my femininity through secret closeted cross-dressing. In these moments, while dressed up, I felt whole, complete, and at peace with myself and the world. Yet I simultaneously felt insane amounts of shame and guilt. So I didn't cross-dress often. Maybe less than 10 times in a span of 7 years. For the longest time I would stare at myself in the mirror looking for feminine features in my face, always happy when I could find one. I look at women and I don't even lust after them. I just appreciate them and have waves of jealousy that they get to live their lives as women. In the last year we had a family member move out of our house. College-age sibling graduated, and I took the opportunity of a quieter house to explore my other side. I dressed up more often and learned more about myself. I pushed away from many of my military friends since they alpha male, high testosterone mentality just disgusts me. I just want to be gentle, loving, and kind. My best friend is a good person, but he constantly pokes fun at the SJW movement and LGBTQ+ communities. This hurts me deep inside, and I have reduced my contact with him to insulate myself. In this same period I started doing research into gender issues and read many stories about transgender folks, both uplifting stories and living nightmares. I learned there is a term and psychological diagnosis for what I experience: gender dysphoria. It felt relieving to know my feelings were recognized. I wasn't just some freak. Through my self-exploration and education I no longer felt shame, just guilt that I was hiding this from my wife. So now that she pinned down a date for parenthood I felt trapped in a corner. I had to tell her how I truly feel inside. I know it's not fair to her to have kept this from her for so long. I had hoped I could just keep it buried deep down and suppress my oddness. But the feelings haven't abated, they have only grown stronger and stronger. I just didn't know how to tell her. She is a very sweet girl, quite vanilla and mostly inside the box. I love her to pieces, but I know this would be far from her more conservative viewpoints. A turning point was when I looked in the mirror one afternoon and I couldn't recognize the odd man staring back at me. He seemed like a total stranger. This messed with my head, and I had trouble acting normal. My wife picked up on it, asking me why I seemed so sad. I had to tell her I couldn't just enter the age of parenthood without her knowing about me. After an hour of crying and her holding me, I finally told her I don't like being a man. This was 2 months ago. Life has been in turmoil since I confessed to her. She is struggling with her identity and role. She is heartbroken and says having children is no longer an option. She has no dreams or goals as they all centered around children. She says she wants to be married to her man and doesn't want to look like a lesbian. She had a rough night while I was away and engaged in some minor self-harm since she has gone to her doctor and is now on antidepressants. I know she is sticking around with hopes I can just work with my therapist and determine my feelings of wanting to be a woman are not valid. She cries most nights and our weekends are spent in anguish. She keeps begging, please pick me, and says she hopes she is worthy. Do you know how hard it is to hear her pleading? I'm so fucking torn. I don't want to keep living a lie, but I love my wife and need her. I see what this is doing to her and feel like a total piece of shit. Like a literal garbage human being. The worst part is this isn't some conscious and poor decision I made that is ripping her heart out, like if I cheated or something. This is feeling of my identity and who I am. Deep down the real me. I have no idea what to do. If I choose to pursue transition, I will surely lose my marriage. If I choose not to, I don't know how I can keep on living out the rest of my life as a lie. I'm so lost and scared. This world is cruel. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.